By the early 1940s, the nature of armored warfare had already begun to redefine the rules of battle. Germany, having emerged from the ashes of World War I with a disciplined military and a determination to dominate the battlefield, poured resources into designing tanks that combined firepower, armor, and mobility in ways the world had rarely seen. The Panther, the Panzer IV, and the formidable Tiger Wing were the result of a calculated obsession with engineering perfection. The Tiger, introduced in 1942, was the pinnacle of this pursuit. Its thick frontal armor, reaching up to 100 millimeters in places, and its 88mm KWK-36 gun allowed it to destroy virtually any Allied tank at ranges that rendered return fire ineffective. Crews were trained to respect the mechanics of their machine, to move in concert like a single organism. Reports from early encounters on the Eastern Front with the Soviet T-34 only reinforced the myth of invincibility surrounding these beasts. Soldiers whispered tales of tigers cutting through lines with terrifying efficiency, their roar echoing across frozen plains and ruined villages. In these reports, the image of the tiger became larger than life, both feared and revered. Yet even as Germany celebrated its technological achievements, cracks began to show in the strategy underpinning their armored doctrine. The Tiger's immense weight made it difficult to transport, slow to maneuver, and prone to mechanical failures in harsh conditions. Fuel consumption was staggering, and spare parts were scarce. Crews often found themselves stranded, vulnerable to artillery or concentrated infantry attacks, despite the legend of their armor. The Allies, observing these strengths and weaknesses with careful calculation, began to study ways to counter what seemed unassailable. American and British military engineers focused on lightweight, portable anti-tank weapons designed not to outgun the Tiger, but to exploit its mobility limitations and the gaps in armor that even the heaviest tanks could not fully cover. This approach required not massive firepower, but precision, ingenuity, and a willingness to face overwhelming odds. Infantry units trained tirelessly with these new tools, preparing for the moment when they would confront the armored giants of the Wehrmacht in fields, forests, and towns across Europe. On the Allied side, the development of the M1 bazooka represented a breakthrough in anti-tank warfare. Compact, portable, and capable of firing a shape-charged warhead, it allowed a single soldier to challenge tanks that had previously seemed impervious. The Americans studied battle reports from North Africa, Italy, and the Eastern Front to understand where armor was weakest. They learned that even the Tiger had vulnerabilities: thinner side armor, exposed tracks, and less armored rear sections. Infantry units were drilled to approach from covered positions, aiming for these points, often at distances under 100 yards. The bazooka did not promise the certainty of destruction, but it gave the soldier a fighting chance, a new form of agency in a war dominated by massive machines and overwhelming firepower. Meanwhile, German command underestimated the psychological and tactical impact of these small weapons. Tigers were deployed as spearheads, intended to crush enemy defenses and inspire awe among both civilians and Allied forces. Crews internalized the sense of superiority, trained to see themselves as almost invincible. Commanders, confident in the myth of the Tiger, often assigned them to critical breakthroughs, unaware that even a single skilled infantryman armed with a bazooka could turn the tide in a localized encounter. As the Allies prepared for the invasion of France in 1944, every battalion, regiment, and company studied these lessons carefully. Training exercises simulated the engagement of heavy German tanks with infantry squads, teaching young soldiers how to remain calm under the gaze of a machine that could. These early developments set the stage for the collision between raw technological power and human ingenuity. The Tiger, a symbol of German industrial might, carried with it both the terror of invincibility and the seeds of vulnerability. The Allies, armed with bazookas and determination, were learning to exploit those vulnerabilities, not in theory, but in practice. The tension between massive armored dominance and portable, clever infantry weaponry became a defining element of late war combat. Soldiers on both sides understood the stakes. One small miscalculation, one fortunate shot, could shift the balance of a battle, leaving survivors to recount the clash in hushed tones for years to come. And as these forces prepared to meet on the fields and towns of Europe, The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything crews believed about invincibility, courage, and the limits of technology in warfare. The myth of the Tiger was about to face a test that no amount of steel could guarantee surviving. While the Tiger tanks symbolized German engineering brilliance, the Allied forces were preparing to confront them not with matching armor, but with innovation, agility, and adaptability. The United States Army, still relatively new to large-scale mechanized warfare, had learned hard lessons in North Africa and Italy. In battles where German armor dominated, infantry found themselves outgunned, facing tanks that could obliterate fortifications and vehicles from hundreds of yards away. Planners realized that the solution could not be to build heavier tanks. They lacked the industrial capacity and time, but to empower foot soldiers with weapons capable of neutralizing the seemingly unstoppable Tiger. The result was the M1 Bazooka, officially entering combat in late 1942, a shoulder-fired rocket launcher that combined simplicity with deadly effectiveness. Its high explosive anti-tank rounds exploited weaknesses in armor, particularly the Tiger's sides and rear, where plating was thinner. What the Tiger could not anticipate was that even a single well-placed bazooka round could turn the battlefield in favor of the infantry. Training for bazooka crews was rigorous, reflecting the stakes of confronting these armored behemoths. Soldiers learned to move silently across fields, hide behind rubble, and approach tanks at angles that maximized the weapon's effectiveness. Officers drilled their units repeatedly, emphasizing teamwork, communication, and patience. These men were taught to face a machine that could destroy dozens of soldiers with a single shot, yet still find the courage to take aim. Many veterans would later describe the first sight of a Tiger in the distance as overwhelming, an almost mythical presence, yet the bazooka gave them agency. It was a weapon not of brute force, but of strategy, skill, and timing, a small spark that could ignite disproportionate change in the theater of war. By 1944, American and British forces had accumulated substantial intelligence on German armor. Reconnaissance, captured soldiers' accounts, and battlefield photography revealed patterns in Tiger deployment and armor weaknesses. Side and rear plates were consistently thinner. The turret ring, while heavily armored, remained a mechanical vulnerability. Artillery and tank support could not always respond quickly, leaving the infantry exposed if they miscalculated. This knowledge informed combat doctrine. Bazooka squads were deployed in coordinated teams, often supported by covering fire from rifles, machine guns, and mortars. Soldiers moved in synchrony, knowing that hesitation could be fatal and that the element of surprise was their greatest ally. The psychology of engagement was as critical as the mechanics of firing the weapon. Fear, training, and timing combined into a single moment where life and death were measured in inches and seconds. German crews, confident in the superiority of their tanks, often underestimated these human threats. Tigers were deployed in spearhead formations, intended to dominate both terrain and morale. Orders emphasized aggressive advance, the destruction of enemy armor, and maintaining momentum. Crews developed a sense of near invulnerability, their faith in steel and engineering hardening over months of combat. Yet even the most experienced gunners could not anticipate the sudden, close-range appearance of an M1 bazooka team, waiting behind rubble or hedgerows. Every encounter carried a psychological element. The heavy roar of the Tiger became an alarm, a reminder that despite technological mastery, the battlefield was unpredictable. Soldiers who had relied solely on armor to protect them began to reconsider their assumptions, understanding that vulnerability was never theoretical. The introduction of the bazooka also altered the broader strategy of Allied infantry. Rather than avoiding tank encounters or retreating in the face of superior firepower, units were trained to embrace calculated risk. Urban and rural engagements were mapped meticulously, with bazooka teams assigned to flanking routes, rooftops, and concealed positions. Coordination with supporting infantry and artillery ensured that even if the first shot failed, follow-up attacks could exploit any disruption caused by the initial assault. Reports from training exercises emphasized morale. Soldiers had to believe in their ability to hit the target, to overcome fear, and to survive. This preparation, combined with the element of surprise and battlefield ingenuity, created a new paradigm in anti-tank warfare. Human determination and tactical precision could challenge the mightiest machines. As the Allies advanced toward France in preparation for D-Day, the stakes were undeniable. Every Tiger encountered represented not just a physical threat, but a test of discipline, courage, and adaptability. Bazooka teams were embedded within units, trained to act decisively, and instructed in the psychology of armored confrontation. They were taught to observe, calculate, and act without hesitation. When the first shots of the M1 bazooka rang out against Tiger armor in Normandy, it was not merely a battle of machines. It was a confrontation of doctrine, ingenuity, and human will. The myth of invulnerability that had shielded German crews for years was on the verge of shattering, and the battlefield was about to witness the profound consequences of preparation meeting opportunity. The battlefield of 1944 was a theater of constant calculation, where tactics determined survival as much as firepower. For German Tiger crews, every advance required meticulous coordination with infantry, artillery, and other armored units. The Tiger's immense power made it a formidable spearhead, capable of breaking defensive lines with terrifying efficiency. Yet this very reliance on brute force became a vulnerability when facing determined infantry armed with bazookas. Tactically, American soldiers adapted quickly. They learned to identify choke points, ambush routes, and terrain features that could neutralize the Tiger's mobility advantage. Small teams moved in synchronization, using hedgerows, buildings, and natural cover to approach undetected. A single well-aimed bazooka round striking a Tiger's thinner side or rear armor could immobilize the tank, turning its strength into a liability. Infantry units learned that patience and positioning mattered more than numbers. The Tiger's roar became not a signal of defeat, but a lure into carefully prepared traps. The clash of strategy and improvisation defined these encounters. Where raw power collided with human cunning, technology, however, remained the defining factor in these confrontations. The Tiger tank was a masterpiece of engineering, with armor designed to repel virtually any anti-tank round at long distances. Its 88mm gun could annihilate enemy tanks before they came within striking range. The vehicle's suspension, heavy treads, and mechanical complexity allowed it to traverse terrain that would halt lesser vehicles. Yet this technological superiority carried inherent flaws. The sheer weight of the Tiger restricted speed and maneuverability, making it difficult to respond to nimble, concealed infantry. Mechanical failures were common under the strain of long campaigns, leaving tanks vulnerable to even modest attacks. The M1 bazooka, by contrast, was simple, portable, and easy to deploy. Its shaped charge warhead was specifically designed to exploit armor weaknesses. When a bazooka round struck correctly, the explosive force could penetrate steel that had been considered impenetrable. The contrast between the massive, intricate Tiger and the lightweight, improvised bazooka underscored a central truth of warfare. Sometimes innovation, not size or complexity, determined victory. Leadership played an equally crucial role in these engagements. German officers expected discipline, precision, and adherence to doctrine from their crews. Tigers were often led into battle by men who had risen through the ranks on merit, trained to respect the machine as much as the strategy it embodied. Command decisions emphasized concentrated firepower and forward momentum, but they did not always account for the unpredictability of infantry equipped with bazookas. Crews often faced moments of extreme tension, where a single error in judgment could leave them exposed to what seemed like an almost trivial threat. On the Allied side, leadership emphasized flexibility, initiative, and the empowerment of individual soldiers. Bazooka teams were led by sergeants who understood the psychological weight of facing a Tiger. They trained men not merely to fire the weapon, but to anticipate enemy movement, exploit terrain, and remain composed under the shadow of overwhelming firepower. Leadership was not a matter of commanding machines, but of orchestrating human will against a superior force. Tactically, technological, and leadership elements intersected on the battlefield in ways that were both unpredictable and decisive. Crews inside Tigers were acutely aware of their own strengths and limitations. They knew that frontal assaults often proved deadly for infantry, but flanking attacks or concealed bazooka teams could expose vulnerabilities. The psychological toll of operating a supposedly invincible machine while knowing that one small, human-launched projectile could end their lives was immense. Soldiers reported moments of disbelief when their tanks were struck, the sound of metal being penetrated echoing through the cabin. Commanders had to balance aggression with caution, aware that a single misjudgment could cascade into catastrophic loss. Conversely, Allied bazooka teams drew confidence from their preparation and knowledge of Tiger weaknesses. Every successful strike reinforced morale, demonstrating that ingenuity could overcome raw power. The technological duel also highlighted the evolution of combined arms warfare. Tigers were designed to operate in conjunction with infantry, artillery, and air support, creating a layered offensive capability. Bazooka teams, in contrast, relied on speed, stealth, and collaboration with fellow infantry. This contrast created dynamic encounters where both sides adapted constantly. German gunners adjusted firing patterns, relying on defensive positioning and coordination with supporting forces, while bazooka teams refined tactics for approach, targeting, and retreat. Battles became mental as much as physical, a constant test of observation, timing, and nerve. The tension between these approaches defined the war's late-stage armored engagements, illustrating how human strategy and technological capability could not be divorced from one another. From the German command perspective, the emergence of bazooka-equipped infantry posed an unexpected dilemma. High-ranking officers had assumed that the Tiger's armor and firepower would dominate the battlefield, enabling rapid breakthroughs and decisive victories. Field reports, however, began to highlight the growing vulnerability of these heavy tanks in urban or forested terrain, where Allied infantry could approach undetected. Commanders faced the challenge of adapting doctrine while maintaining confidence among crews and troops. Some officers insisted on stricter coordination with infantry and artillery to protect Tigers, while others hesitated, unwilling to admit that the technological marvels they had relied upon could be countered by simple, portable weapons. Orders were adjusted, tactics revised, but the psychological impact on leadership was palpable. Every report of a disabled Tiger raised questions not only about armor and firepower, but also about the human cost of overconfidence and the unpredictability of war. At the same time, the moral dimension of infantry action came into sharp relief. American bazooka teams operated under extraordinary pressure, facing tanks that could destroy dozens of soldiers with a single shot. Courage, discipline, and trust in one another became essential. Soldiers often described the surreal experience of aiming at a Tiger, feeling both fear and determination in equal measure. The stakes were absolute. Success could mean the survival of comrades, failure meant death. These small units embodied a profound moral lesson in warfare, that bravery, ingenuity, and the willingness to confront danger directly could neutralize even the most formidable technological advantages. The battlefield became a crucible where human resolve tested the limits of machinery, proving that heroism could manifest not in the weight of steel, but in the precision of thought and action. The interaction between crew psychology, command strategy, and infantry bravery created a complex and fragile equilibrium on the battlefield. Tigers could dominate open terrain, but the unpredictability of infantry tactics and the sharpness of human calculation transformed every encounter into a test of nerve and skill. Crews inside tanks began to develop defensive habits beyond standard procedure, scanning for hidden threats and anticipating ambushes. Bazooka teams learned to capitalize on every opportunity, moving with agility and patience, striking with precision, and retreating before counterfire could end their mission. Commanders, observing these engagements, adjusted deployments to mitigate risk, but the human factor remained decisive. Even the most sophisticated machinery could not fully neutralize the courage, ingenuity, and tactical awareness of determined soldiers. Human experience also shaped the interpretation of technology and tactics. For the Tiger crew, every close encounter left a lasting impression, informing their understanding of both their own vulnerability and the ingenuity of the enemy. For bazooka teams, success reinforced confidence in training and preparation, creating a cycle where courage and capability reinforced each other. German officers struggled to reconcile the loss of Tigers with doctrine and planning, while American commanders studied each engagement to refine anti-tank strategies. The battlefield was not merely a contest of firepower. It was a negotiation between human adaptability, leadership foresight, and technological potential. Every decision carried consequences, every moment required judgment under pressure, and every strike reflected both mechanical function and human intent. Ultimately, the moral of these encounters lay in the unpredictable interplay of courage and capability. Tigers, despite their reputation for invincibility, could be felled by small teams acting decisively. Bazooka crews, operating under immense stress, demonstrated that skill, courage, and innovation could redefine the battlefield. Leadership, whether in the cabin of a tank or the planning rooms of command posts, had to account for both human psychology and technological reality. And throughout these battles, soldiers on both sides discovered a profound truth. The machinery of war, no matter how sophisticated, was only as effective as the people who wielded it. Fear, ingenuity, and moral resolve became as critical as armor thickness or gun caliber, shaping the outcomes of engagements that would resonate far beyond the fields where they occurred. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy lay shrouded in morning fog, salt spray mixing with smoke from naval bombardments. Amid the chaos, German Tiger tanks waited inland, positioned to repel the anticipated Allied advance. Their armor gleamed under the muted light, a promise of dominance over any approaching force. Crews sat tensely inside, scanning the terrain with practiced vigilance, every muscle attuned to the anticipation of combat. Yet among the advancing infantry, small, unassuming figures carried weapons that would soon challenge the myth of invincibility. M1 bazooka teams, trained to exploit the vulnerabilities of these giants, moved through hedgerows and ruined buildings, their eyes fixed, their hands steady despite the thunder of shells around them. The first encounter would test everything these men and machines represented, and the outcome would reshape armored warfare. At 0900 hours, a Tiger advanced toward a concealed position along a narrow lane. The crew, confident in their frontal armor, scanned for tanks or artillery, unaware that a bazooka team had positioned itself in a collapsed barn less than 50 yards away. The soldier took careful aim, heart hammering, and fired. The rocket struck the side armor, penetrating steel that had seemed impervious for years. Inside, the crew reacted with disbelief and panic, the shock of the impact echoing through the confined space. The tank shuddered, tread slipping in the churned mud, and the commander barked orders that could no longer be executed effectively. This single moment marked a turning point. The illusion of the Tiger's invulnerability had been shattered in a manner that was both immediate and irrevocable. News of similar encounters spread rapidly through German units. Reports from hedgerows outside Carentan detailed multiple Tigers disabled by coordinated bazooka attacks. Commanders struggled to reconcile the loss of heavy tanks with existing doctrine. Crews began to adopt defensive habits, rarely advancing without infantry support, and constantly scanning for concealed threats. The psychological impact was immense. Veterans reported a new wariness when engaging enemy positions, a recognition that even a few infantrymen could overturn a carefully planned advance. In parallel, American units gained confidence, refining tactics based on the success of these early engagements. Bazooka teams moved with increasing precision, targeting flanks, rear sections, and turret rings, exploiting every structural weakness of the Tiger. One notable encounter occurred on July 18, 1944, near St. Lo. A Tiger company, advancing along a narrow forest road, came under sudden fire from 3 bazooka teams hidden in ruined farmhouses. Rockets struck side armor, causing catastrophic internal damage and forcing 2 tanks to retreat under a hail of small arms fire. German commanders were forced to halt their advance, coordinating repairs and reorganizing units under constant threat. Historians later cited this engagement as a turning point, illustrating how infantry-initiated attacks could disrupt armored formations that had previously seemed unstoppable. The engagement demonstrated a fundamental shift in battlefield dynamics. The combination of human initiative, portable technology, and tactical foresight could challenge even the most formidable machinery. The cumulative effect of these encounters transformed both tactics and morale. Tiger crews began to avoid predictable routes, and infantry teams gained confidence in taking calculated risks. Commanders ordered more cautious advances, ensuring artillery and supporting infantry were positioned to counter potential bazooka threats. Soldiers on both sides quickly realized that the success of one small weapon could ripple outward, influencing the decisions of entire companies and battalions. The battlefield, once dominated by sheer firepower, now required constant adaptation, ingenuity, and rapid response. Every movement carried risk, and every engagement tested both the limits of technology and the resolve of the human operators. By late July, American units had refined a doctrine for engaging heavy German armor. Bazooka teams were deployed in coordinated squads, moving in synchronized patterns to maximize coverage and minimize exposure. Soldiers studied terrain, enemy positioning, and armor layouts meticulously. The doctrine emphasized patience and precision. Rushing an attack often meant failure, while careful observation and timing could result in multiple tanks being disabled with minimal risk. German units, in response, began to develop counter-tactics, emphasizing combined arms coordination and protective screening, yet the psychological pressure remained. The fear of sudden, unexpected bazooka strikes forced commanders and crews to constantly reconsider their assumptions, eroding the aura of invincibility that had once surrounded the Tiger. The first weeks of these engagements underscored a profound reality. The evolution of anti-tank tactics had outpaced the armor's presumed superiority. Infantry ingenuity, training, and courage demonstrated that even the most formidable weapons could be countered when human skill intersected with opportunity. The battlefield had become a test of anticipation, observation, and rapid decision-making, where the smallest misstep could have catastrophic consequences. And in that foggy Normandy morning, with the first bazooka round striking, true, the war of steel and courage entered a new chapter, one where power alone no longer dictated outcome, and where human initiative could topple what once seemed impossible. The lessons learned from these early encounters would echo throughout the campaign in Western Europe. Tigers remained formidable, but they were no longer untouchable. Crews adapted, commanders adjusted tactics, and infantry teams evolved into a decisive force capable of challenging armored dominance. The first successful bazooka strikes were not merely isolated victories, they marked the beginning of a paradigm shift in armored warfare. The stage was set for countless confrontations in which courage, precision, and innovation would define the limits of technology on the battlefield, reshaping the perception of invincibility in ways that would endure long after the guns fell silent. The aftermath of the initial bazooka strikes reverberated immediately through German armored units. Crews who had once advanced with confidence now moved cautiously, scanning for hidden threats, aware that every hedge, wall, or ruined building could conceal a lethal assailant. Tigers, previously symbols of invincibility, became both a tactical asset and a psychological burden. The roar of the 88mm gun, once a herald of dominance, now carried a shadow of apprehension. Commanders adjusted formations, pairing tanks with infantry for protection, and relying more heavily on reconnaissance to identify potential ambushes. Even experienced crews, hardened by campaigns on the Eastern Front and in Italy, began to recognize that no machine, however technologically superior, could guarantee survival against an opponent who combined skill, patience, and ingenuity. In one memorable engagement near Carentan, a Tiger platoon advancing through a narrow corridor came under fire from multiple concealed bazooka teams. Rockets struck the side and rear armor of successive tanks, immobilizing two and causing the third to retreat under concentrated rifle and machine gun fire. Inside the disabled vehicles, crews grappled with a mixture of panic and disbelief. For many, this was the first confrontation where the myth of invulnerability collided with harsh reality. Soldiers recounted the sudden shudder of steel under attack, the acrid smoke filling cramped cabins, and the desperate struggle to maintain control as instruments failed or engines faltered. The engagement illustrated a new truth. No amount of armor could fully insulate crews from the ingenuity and determination of well-trained infantry. The broader tactical consequences of these encounters were profound. German commanders began to reevaluate deployment strategies for their heaviest tanks, limiting frontal advances in exposed terrain and emphasizing combined arms coordination. Tigers were increasingly used in concert with Panzer IVs, infantry, and artillery to mitigate the risk posed by bazooka teams. Nevertheless, the psychological impact remained. Crews reported heightened anxiety, slower decision-making, and a newfound awareness of vulnerability. Even routine reconnaissance missions required extreme caution, with every hedge and ruined structure considered a potential death trap. The human element, often overlooked in favor of technological superiority, became decisive. Fear, anticipation, and split-second judgment now determined outcomes as much as firepower. American infantry capitalized on this evolving dynamic. Bazooka teams, trained to exploit these vulnerabilities, coordinated attacks with other units to maximize effectiveness. Small squads used terrain to conceal movement, timed their shots carefully, and maintained communication to adjust positioning as targets moved. The psychological effect on the enemy was amplified by the precision of their strikes. Each successful penetration reinforced morale and emboldened teams to take calculated risks, creating a cascading effect on the battlefield. Commanders observed that when one Tiger was disabled, the remaining armored units often hesitated, overcompensating with defensive maneuvers that slowed advances and exposed them to further attacks. The battlefield became a theater of both mechanical and human calculation, where initiative, courage, and observation shaped the outcome as much as steel and ammunition. As the campaign progressed, the interplay between technology and human ingenuity grew more pronounced. Tiger crews adapted, employing evasive maneuvers, flanking and coordinated attacks to reduce exposure to bazooka fire. Infantry teams refined tactics, identifying weak points and exploiting terrain with increasing precision. Battles became complex, layered confrontations, where success required mastery of both machinery and human psychology. Reports from the field emphasized observation, patience, and timing, recognizing that a single misjudgment could neutralize even the most powerful tank. The confrontation was no longer purely physical. It was an intricate contest of anticipation, nerve, and strategic thinking. One striking example occurred near Saint-Lô in late July 1944. A combined Allied infantry force, supported by bazooka teams, engaged a small German armored detachment, including 3 Tigers. Using careful observation and coordination, soldiers moved from cover to cover, striking the side and rear armor of the tanks in rapid succession. 2 Tigers were disabled outright, forcing the third to retreat under suppressive fire. German crews were stunned, their confidence shattered not by overwhelming numbers or artillery, but by small, highly disciplined teams acting decisively. Commanders quickly recognized the implications. The tactics that had worked for months were no longer sufficient, and armor science, a dominance required adaptation. The encounter became a case study in the evolving nature of late-war combat, highlighting the transformative effect of portable anti-tank weaponry. The human dimension of these engagements cannot be overstated. For crews, every encounter with a bazooka team carried the weight of life and death, a test of nerve and judgment. For infantry, the stakes were equally high. Courage, precision, and timing determined success. The battlefield, once dominated by the raw power of machines, now demanded ingenuity, skill, and psychological resilience. Each encounter reshaped perceptions of both technology and human capability, demonstrating that no weapon, no matter how formidable, could guarantee dominance without the interplay of strategy and determination. By the end of July 1944, the cumulative effect of these engagements had altered the course of armored warfare in Normandy. Tigers remained powerful, but their aura of invincibility was gone. Crews adapted defensively, commanders revised doctrine, and infantry units refined anti-tank tactics. The confrontation between bazooka and Tiger became emblematic of a larger truth. Warfare was no longer dictated solely by technological might, but by the human ability to innovate, adapt, and act decisively under pressure. The battlefield had shifted, forever altering the perception of armored supremacy and demonstrating that courage, ingenuity, and precision could challenge even the most imposing instruments of war. The immediate consequences of the first successful bazooka strikes against Tiger tanks were both tangible and psychological. German armored units, once confident in their machines' invincibility, began to approach every engagement with caution. Crews adjusted firing patterns, reinforced flanks, and coordinated more closely with infantry and artillery support. Even the most experienced soldiers, who had faced Soviet T-34s in Italian terrain, now found themselves confronting a new, unpredictable threat. Each disabled tank became a lesson in vulnerability, and the myth of the Tiger as an unstoppable force began to erode. Commanders in Normandy and elsewhere recognized that superior firepower alone could no longer dictate battlefield outcomes. Human ingenuity and adaptability had emerged as decisive factors. The scale of the shift was subtle yet profound, signaling a transformation in armored warfare that would reverberate through subsequent campaigns. Operational losses underscored the tactical impact. In early July 1944, American infantry reports documented multiple Tigers immobilized or destroyed by bazooka teams in hedgerow fighting near Carentan and St. Lo. These were not isolated incidents, but indicative of a growing pattern. Even a few infantrymen, using terrain, timing, and precision, could neutralize the heaviest German armor. German records noted delays, forced retreats, and damaged vehicles, prompting adjustments in strategy. Officers increasingly emphasized combined arms coordination, sending tanks forward only under protective cover and integrating reconnaissance more heavily into tactical planning. The disruption of armored formations, even temporarily, shifted momentum on local battlefields, allowing Allied units to consolidate gains and press their advantage. The psychological consequences were equally significant. Crews entered every engagement with heightened vigilance, aware that a concealed bazooka team could strike without warning. Fear and caution began to influence decision-making, slowing advances and creating hesitation where aggression had previously been standard. Soldiers reported tension, anxiety, and a newfound respect for the infantry they had once considered subordinate. Commanders recognized that morale, as much as armor thickness or gun caliber, influenced battlefield effectiveness, as did each encounter with a bazooka team reinforced the idea that even a technologically superior vehicle could not compensate for human initiative and ingenuity. Allied morale, in contrast, soared. Bazooka teams gained confidence with each successful strike, refining tactics and understanding the vulnerabilities of the Tiger. Soldiers learned to move stealthily, coordinate with one another, and exploit terrain with precision. Commanders incorporated these lessons into training, emphasizing preparation, observation, and patience. The psychological effect on the broader force was profound. A weapon once considered small and secondary had demonstrated the ability to alter the balance of power. Infantrymen, who had previously felt overshadowed by tanks and artillery, now understood that skill and courage could achieve outcomes previously reserved for armored divisions. Beyond the battlefield, these encounters influenced tactical doctrine. The Allies formalized bazooka deployment strategies, integrating teams into infantry units and emphasizing ambush tactics in hedgerows, towns, and forests. Emphasis was placed on target selection, coordinated fire, and the use of terrain to maximize effectiveness while minimizing exposure. These refinements transformed the bazooka from a supplementary weapon into a central tool in anti-armor operations, reshaping the way infantry confronted heavy German tanks. The lessons extended beyond Normandy, informing campaigns in Italy and later operations across Western Europe. Strategically, the implications were clear. The Tiger remained a symbol of German engineering, yet its limitations were exposed. Mobility, maintenance, and vulnerability to infantry with portable anti-tank weapons had to be accounted for in every operational plan. Commanders were forced to reconsider deployment, logistics, and coordination, balancing the machine's power again. As the human threat, it could not easily anticipate the interplay between technology and human initiative had shifted. demonstrating that even the most formidable weapon could be countered with careful planning, courage, and precision. In the days and weeks following these first engagements, both sides adapted rapidly. German crews adjusted formations and procedures, seeking to mitigate vulnerability while preserving offensive potential. Allied infantry honed skills, perfected coordination, and strengthened morale, realizing that even the most daunting enemy could be overcome. The battlefield had transformed into a crucible of innovation, discipline, and human resolve, where small weapons and careful strategy could challenge the mightiest machines. The consequences of these encounters would ripple through the remaining months of the war, altering armored doctrine and leaving an indelible mark on the understanding of mechanized combat. The strategic consequences of bazooka engagements against Tiger tanks extended far beyond immediate losses. German armored doctrine had long relied on the assumption that heavy tanks could dominate both open terrain and fortified positions. After repeated encounters with well-trained American infantry, this assumption was challenged. Commanders were forced to revise deployment strategies, limiting frontal assaults in vulnerable terrain and emphasizing coordination with reconnaissance, infantry, and artillery. Even when Tigers advanced with numerical superiority, the threat posed by portable anti-tank weapons demanded caution, reshaping operational tempo and battlefield psychology. What had once been considered an unstoppable force now required careful protection and deliberate action. The war of perception, as much as technology, had shifted in favor of Allied forces. Operational reports from July and August 1944 illustrate the cumulative effect. Tigers immobilized in the hedgerows of Normandy, combined Wiederschaft Salse with other logistical challenges, delayed German counterattacks, and disrupted defensive lines. Each disabled tank consumed time and resources as crews awaited repairs or reinforcements. Commanders recalculated strategies, aware that reliance on armor alone could no longer secure victory. The repeated success of bazooka teams forced a re-evaluation of mechanized doctrine. Speed, firepower, and armor were no longer sufficient in isolation. The human factor, creativity, courage, and timing, emerged as a decisive variable on the battlefield. These encounters also had a pronounced psychological impact on German soldiers and officers. Crews, previously confident in the integrity of their vehicles, now approached engagements with increased caution, scanning every shadow and terrain feature for potential threats. The awareness that a single infantryman, armed with a relatively lightweight weapon, could disable a Tiger eroded the aura of invincibility that had sustained morale. Commanders faced the dual challenge of maintaining discipline and confidence while adapting tactics to account for a new form of threat. Reports indicate that hesitation, stress, and overcompensation influenced decision-making, slowing advances and occasionally creating vulnerabilities elsewhere. The battlefield became not only a test of machines, but of human resolve under pressure. Allied forces, conversely, were emboldened by the demonstrated effectiveness of their training and tactics. Bazooka teams, operating in carefully coordinated squads, achieved results that surpassed expectations. Success reinforced morale, and soldiers gained confidence in the principle that preparation, courage, and ingenuity could overcome even the most imposing adversary. Commanders incorporated these lessons into operational planning, emphasizing the integration of bazooka teams into larger formations and assigning them critical roles in ambushes and defensive positions. The human factor became central to the application of anti-tank strategy, highlighting the importance of discipline, observation, and timing. The broader implications for armored warfare were profound. The encounters demonstrated that technological superiority alone could not dictate outcomes when confronted with human innovation and tactical foresight. German heavy tanks remained powerful, yet their limitations had been exposed. Vulnerability in flanks and rear armor, mechanical constraints, and susceptibility to small, highly trained teams. Allied doctrine adapted to exploit these weaknesses, emphasizing mobility, terrain usage, and precision strikes. The result was a fundamental shift in the balance of power on the battlefield, where infantry equipped with portable weapons could exert influence disproportionate to their size or firepower. By the end of the summer of 1944, the combined effect of these engagements had permanently altered both tactical and strategic thinking. Tigers remained a fearsome presence, but their aura of invincibility had been eroded by human ingenuity and the tactical deployment of bazookas. Crews adapted defensively, commanders revised doctrine, and Allied forces demonstrated that preparation and courage could overcome even the most formidable machines. These encounters provided lessons that would inform armored warfare for decades, illustrating the enduring truth that human skill, innovation, and determination could shape outcomes as decisively as any technological advancement. In the aftermath, it became clear that the war of machines was inseparable from the war of humans. Technology provided capability, but its effectiveness was constrained by human psychology, decision-making, and initiative. Bazooka teams had proven that small, adaptable forces could neutralize seemingly invincible machines, forcing a re-evaluation of armor doctrine and operational strategy. The battlefield had transformed into a complex interplay of steel, courage, and ingenuity, where victory depended as much on skill and observation as on firepower. The consequences of these encounters would resonate throughout the remainder of the campaign, leaving a permanent mark on the understanding of mechanized combat and demonstrating that even the mightiest tanks could be humbled by human determination and precision. The confrontation between American bazooka teams and German Tiger tanks offers a profound reflection on the nature of warfare. For years, the Tiger had embodied invincibility, a symbol of technological mastery and industrial power. Its armor and firepower inspired fear across battlefields from the Eastern Front to Western Europe. Yet in Normandy, that myth met its match not in another tank or massive artillery, but in the ingenuity, courage, and precision of individual soldiers. A small, portable weapon, wielded with skill and discipline, reshaped the dynamics of combat and challenged assumptions about the limits of technology. It was a reminder that no machine, regardless of its sophistication, could operate in isolation from human factors. These encounters underscore the interplay between technology and humanity. Tanks like the Tiger represented raw power, but they were ultimately dependent on the decisions, courage, and composure of those inside. Bazooka teams demonstrated that awareness, training, and strategic thinking could compensate for disparity in size and firepower. Each successful strike was not merely a tactical victory, but a testament to human resilience and the capacity to innovate under extreme pressure. Soldiers learned to trust their preparation, act decisively, and confront seemingly insurmountable odds with resolve. In doing so, they redefined the rules of engagement and reshaped the perception of armored warfare forever.